for human transmission. When Chan published a paper on his findings, Peter Daszak attacked it and reported he was listening. Daszak called Chan's conclusions preposterous and put conspiracy theories. The media organizations followed suit, and the story went away. After all, Lena Chan was just one molecular biologist. What did she know? She was easy enough to ignore. And that's exactly what happened to the Chinese professors in Manila. And we've spoken to them. Dennis working on the ability of the pandemic. But the American media dismissed her as a nut, as a conspiracy theorist. There's nothing to see here. Go away, President Chinese lady. And sure she did. But going forward, it may be much more difficult I'm of the point of view that I still think the most likely etiology of this that is in the Wuhan with the summer laboratory in the United States. Other people don't believe that, but science will eventually figure it out. It's not unusual for respiratory pathogens that are being working in the laboratory. Robert Redfield as some kind of female teacher. They're innocent. He's not. Redfield become an art who spent his life studying philosophy. Everything is always right about it. In fact, he's often been wrong during this pandemic. But it does mean that what he says is worth accepting carefully. That's supposed to be what journals do for a living. They look into claims that have somewhere, not proven, but should be looked into, especially claims that have enormous implications for the future. But that's not really close to what happened. The Times reported that MSNBC and CNN were taking to the scientists for Japan got to work immediately. Como si decide que la población, por ahora estamos buscando una documental. The people with COVID-19 originated from Wuhan. It is one of the most common to support the group. So the laboratory doesn't seem like a job for you. Unless you with the biggest collection of coronaviruses and put them in a lab, the theory that the virus originated in a lab in Wuhan, China. That's right. Dr. Anthony Fauci tells National Geographic that COVID Cool. Both scientists and the economists agree that this coronavirus was not eliminated. That is not a possibility. It came from a natural source. It didn't come from a lab. But I don't know if the lab got escaped from a lab because it sounds like something from Harvard or comic book. It sounds like they're talking about a man-made virus that China was weaponizing got out of control. The scientists and the U.S. intelligence community are unanimous. This is not coming from a lab. That's what interesting because we don't know. There isn't conclusive evidence in either direction. So why would these self-reported student doctors and talking heads listen to historical and basically claim something they can prove? The New York Times principle, they really published a hit piece entitled "Ex-CDC Director Favors Debunks COVID-19 Origin Theory." According to the New York Times, intelligence agencies have no evidence that coronavirus is from a lab. It isn't exactly true. It's not a settled question. Last April, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a statement noting the intelligence community has in fact not ruled out a leak from the lab in the U.S. Intel officials said they will, quote, continue to rigorously examine emerging information and intelligence to determine whether this outbreak is going to contact with infected animals or if it was a result of an accident in the laboratory in the economy. Recently, just last March, the Director of National Intelligence stood by that statement. So why are so many trying to dismiss these claims out of hand as if they know? Why did President's former director of the CDC be quiet? Earlier in the report, to protect science. The World Health Organization warned about China, let's certainly what the China do that. This is the WHO released what is called a report on the origins of coronavirus. And there was one nation, based in the United States, who participated in WHO's investigation into the origin of the virus. Guess who that person was? Oh, it's Peter Daszak. Surprise, surprise. Now let's see if you can guess what Daszak and his colleagues discovered in their investigation. Well, a whole lot of Chinese innocence. In the WHO's 120-page report on the origins of the virus, only 2 pages
address the possibility it may have come from a lab. Quote, although rare, laboratory accidents do happen, and different laboratories around the world are working with bat coronaviruses. Yes, the report says the Wuhan CDC laboratory moved on the 2nd of December 2019 to a new location near the wet market. Such moves can be disruptive for the operation of any laboratory. But don't get the wrong idea, says the WHO. It is still, and we're quoting, extremely unlikely the virus emerged from the lab. Well, why is it so unlikely exactly? Here's the explanation. Quote, there is no record of viruses closely related to the coronavirus in any laboratory before December 2019, or genomes that in combination could provide a SARS-CoV-2 genome. In other words, we didn't find a paper trail because China didn't leave one. But the World Health Organization would like you to know, if anyone could keep deadly viruses from escaping into the rest of the world, it's the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Quote, the 3 laboratories in Wuhan working with either coronavirus diagnostics and or coronavirus isolation and vaccine development all had high-quality biosafety level facilities that were well managed. Close quote. And case closed. By the way, this is contradicted by first-hand testimony of American diplomats who went into the lab and said, wow, this looks dangerous. But according to WHO, China and the World Health Organization did nothing wrong, so stop asking questions. And yet it's interesting that people won't stop. Some people are continuing to ask. On Sunday, a former national security official told CBS News that the WHO report has all the credibility of a North Korean evening news broadcast. Jamie Metzl served in the Clinton administration, and then the WHO Advisory Committee can't be described as a right-winger. But the report was just too much for Jamie Metzl, and he said so.
I wouldn't really call what's happened now an investigation. It's essentially a highly chaperoned, highly curated study tour. Everybody around the world is imagining this is some kind of full investigation. It's not. This group of experts only saw what the Chinese government wanted them to see. It was agreed first that China would have veto power over who even got to be on the mission. Secondly,
and WHO agreed to that.
WHO agreed to that. But imagine if we had asked the Soviet Union to do a co-investigation of Chernobyl. It doesn't really make sense.
So why are so many people in positions of authority, including the so-called scientific community, so adamant that there's nothing to see here? Well, here's one suggestion. Last year, Richard Ebright, who's a microbiologist at Rutgers, sat for an interview with Boston Magazine, and he explained why the scientific community might want to hide the origins of a pandemic like this. Quote, for the substantial subset of virologists who perform gain-of-function research, avoiding restrictions on research funding, avoiding implementation of appropriate biosafety hazards, and avoiding implementation of appropriate research oversight are powerful motivators. In other words, if something went wrong in Wuhan, it might affect them. Another scientist, Antonio Rigaldo from MIT, was more direct about it. If it is determined that the virus came from a lab, Rigaldo said, it would, quote, shatter the scientific edifice from top to bottom. The scientific edifice is one thing everyone in Washington would like to see preserved. It's what gave politicians the power that they have used for the last year, the power to change elections, to eliminate thousands of small businesses, to make certain industries much richer and more powerful, and destroy others. So tomorrow, the Biden administration is not going to announce a new investigation into the origins of the coronavirus. They're happy with the WHO report. Instead, the Biden administration will announce one of the largest tax hikes in the history of the country, maybe the largest. It's projected to total between $3 and $4 trillion. We don't know the total amount yet. A lot of that cost will fall on people who are not rich or middle class. And Biden people decided to work it in gas tax, which makes certain that hourly workers will hurt most. The point is extremely expensive. Meanwhile, China, whose business and dishonesty knocked America from global preeminence and destroyed millions of lives, does not pay a cent. China is getting richer, we are getting poorer. Expect that trend to continue. Here's the interesting thing. No one is even suggesting reparations to China. No one even utters that word. Reparations are for America to pay. Always. Bill Gersh is the national security correspondent for the Washington Times, author of Deceiving the Sky, Inside Communist China's Drive for Global Supremacy. Tonight, Bill, thanks so much for coming on. What do you believe nonpartisan national security officials believe about the origin of the coronavirus?
Well, it's clear that it was not something that happened naturally. I read the report today. It says there's no evidence that it came from an animal. They haven't been able to find it in bats. They haven't been able to find it in pangolins. And yet they insist that it did not leak from a lab. It's obvious that they have been conducting massive amounts of virus research. You mentioned the Wuhan CDC. They announced last year that they had found 2,000 new viruses. They're obsessed with studying viruses. And of course, this lab moved right around the time that the outbreak began. So it's clear that there's more evidence that it came from a lab than it somehow jumped from an animal, a bat, to a human. Furthermore, I think the unspoken important part of this story is that the Wuhan Institute of Virology denied that it was engaged in secret work with the PLA, the People's Liberation Army. China has a massive biological weapons program that is being carried out in these laboratories in China. Nothing is being done to force them to expose the activities there, including such things as ethnic weapons, that is, biological weapons that can target ethnic groups.
It was clear that health officials in the United States knew perfectly well that American tax dollars were being used to manipulate viruses in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Looking back, that was obviously deeply and wide, possibly fine. Why have those officials not been called out to explain why they allowed this to continue?
I think part of the reason is that the national security community and the intelligence community in the United States in particular lacks the scientific expertise to go after the origin of this virus. Therefore, they've been relying on the scientific community, which in my view has been completely co-opted, as you said, by their ability to do unregulated work inside of China. And I think that it's starting to be realized, other scientists like Dr. Redfield, like others in France, they're coming out and saying, wait a minute, the emperor has no clothes. This is a Chinese strategic deception operation. And we've got to get to the bottom of this, or we're going to be fighting pandemics for the next 50 years.
Of course. And maybe the headline is, around the world, not just Chinese, but American scientists are conducting research that is so reckless that it's immoral, and no one rings the news. We should learn more about that. Bill Gertz, I appreciate coming.